Hello everybody, and thank you for coming and joining me today. I've put together a program that covers many years. I've been making things, objects for 60 years or so, and in a lot of different media. And so I thought what I would do is jump way back in time, because I think it's interesting to learn how people get to where they are, the evolution of their energy and where it first starts and what percolates up. And so I wanted to start with this poem that I wrote when I was making one of my clay figures. And we'll talk about that figure later. I have an image of it. It was meant to be a humorous figure regarding string theory, and the name of the poem is String Theory. The reason I'm including it is it became kind of a metaphor for how I bounce around in my life. And so I was working on the clay piece, and all of a sudden this just downloaded. I wrote it down on the bench. It's called String Theory. Ball of string, many ends, loose ends, wrapped upon itself, tied up, tied together, a list of binding. The string that taught me to wait. Knots, never believing a straight line is the distance between 2 points. The distance between 2 points is a ball of knotted string. And so that kind of became a metaphor for how I view how I've traversed my life. And I thought I would keep it in here. I almost took it out, but I thought it would be a good reference. So what we're going to look at through the rest of this program is my ball of knotted string. And so we can start here. When I was 12 years old, I was playing alto sax, learning to play, and I was crazed over some popular tunes of the time. There was a couple of pieces on 45. One was called Skokian and one was called Tequila. You probably have heard those over the years. I was crazed over learning the saxophone solos. So I went and bought the 45s and brought them home. And what I would do is play a little section and memorize it on the sax. And do another section and memorize that. And so by doing that, I learned how to play those really difficult solos. And I think it was a real indication of the creative energy that was going to come out of me over the years, the fact that I taught myself that way. When I was 14, I was hired into a high school combo band. There was music played, rearranged for small groups, like 5 piano, bass, drums, sax, trumpet, something like that. And so my first gig as a musician, as a professional musician, was playing for my junior high graduation dance. And so I played all through high school very regularly, and that's how I made my money. And then out of high school, the image that we're looking here is me at the Royal Tahitian Restaurant in the Whispering Winds golf course in Ontario. They had just opened this Tahitian restaurant. It was brand new. So me and my friends were in the piano bar, and we played there all summer. By the end of the summer, I was really tired of sitting 5 feet away from the drunks. That was not my idea of a good profession to move into. I also realized at that point in time that I was not going to be John Coltrane or Dexter Gordon, that to do that you had to dedicate yourself 24/7, and I wasn't willing to do that with music. I'd already started art courses, so I decided to focus totally on art from that point on. In 1962, I got a call from the placement office at Chaffey College. I was studying ceramics, drawing, painting. I got a call from Sam Maloof, who's a really internationally known woodworker now. At the time, he was just a really cool guy and known in the LA basin pretty much, making handmade furniture. And so I joined him and worked with him 7 years. And so during that course of training, I added woodworking skills to what I was learning in school as well. During that period of time, the second year I worked for him, I got married. You can see some of the influence of Paul Soldner there. I believed in when you have someone that you really like their work, if you try to recreate that work, you learn skills in the process of doing that. So I loved his stack pots, and so that's one that I made early on. Then we started a family, and we moved on to Sam's property. He had a 3-bedroom house in a grove that he purchased next to him, and so we were able to move in there, and I established a clay studio and a metal studio. And this was the kiln he let me build down in the grove. And so we were there for 7 years. This is the kind of furniture we were making with Sam. This was my training. The picture on the left is Sam Maloof, Sam's son. He's about 17 or 18 in that picture. Paul Vicente is in the middle, a really brilliant designer craftsman, a good friend of mine. He's been in the Bay Area in Richmond for years and years. He eventually wound up working on all those $20 million homes in Silicon Valley. He's a brilliant craftsman. We're all old farts now, but he's had an amazing career himself. I wanted to show the shot on the right because that was taken by a photographer from LA Home Magazine, because they would do articles on Sam all the time, and this is the type of furniture that grew out of the 50s that Sam was designing. Everything was upholstered, and there were no machines in the shop. All of these pieces are hand sanded. And so I worked with Sam 5 years alone as an apprentice, and then Paul and his nephew Nassif and Slimane joined the crew, so we had 5 people working with Sam then. This is an example of a large commission of Sam's low back chairs, his classic. This is an iconic design of Sam's now, and this is the beginning stages of him developing those ideas. What he had changed was he put the curved arm on. The original pieces had a straight arm, and by putting the curved arm on, he changed it into a sculptural form. And those kind of things influenced me, watching him tweak designs and change things. While I was working with Sam, I had established a metal studio next door and a clay studio. And so this was a piece that I made during that time. This is the first large metal piece I made. And I was just teaching myself how to do things, developing an aesthetic. This is gas welded, by the way. I didn't have an arc welder or they didn't have wire feed welders then. So it was quite a challenge to produce that piece. It's kind of kinetic, the wind blows it around. This is my attempt at blacksmithing. I just wanted to create organic forms that tied straps together to create a gate to my house. And this was the little latch I made on the left. These are really crude, but this is part of the learning process where I was teaching myself how to make things the way Sam taught himself how to make furniture. And this is an example of these throne type chairs I was doing. I sanded all week long in Sam's shop on walnut, beautiful walnut. When I went home at night and the weekend, I didn't want to sand on anything. And so a friend of mine gave me a huge pile of sugar pine that was all rough and weathered. And so I started making these giant chairs with forged metal in them and that kind of thing, just for the fun of it. This grew into a little more refined approach. This was in the mid-'60s when I was working with Sam. This photo is actually taken in his front yard. Someone gave me the 2 wheels that are in the back, and when I got the wheels, I immediately got the vision of what I wanted to do with them to make this chair. The seat is a 2-layered steel pan so the upholstery could fit into it. And then I would build the units that would attach the eucalyptus pieces. What I would do is when I come home from work at night, I'd grab my kids, put them in the wagon, and go walking up the tree rows, because at that time in Alta Loma, there were no tracks, no homes. It was all citrus. The roads were very narrow, lined with eucalyptus, and so I would walk along looking for unusual pieces, drag them out on the street, and then I go take them home and get my truck and go back and pick the wood up and take it home to use. So that's how I collected the wood for this piece. At the same time I was doing that kind of work, I was very influenced by Harry McIntosh in Claremont and Paul Sollner. And so I was mainly doing pottery, and I started doing some hand-built stuff, and then started playing around with my ceramic forms with Paul's influence on what I was doing. I was also at that time trying to do some figurative work. The piece on the right is actually made out of coat hanger wire, because I couldn't afford to buy copper-coated rods, so I would go to the thrift store and buy a bag of wire coat hangers, take them out, straighten them out, and I would use those. It was crappy metal, but it worked great for these things. So I would build the forms with long rods, one next to the other, then go back in and puddle the metal in to fill them in. And I developed techniques with my torch where I could actually make delicate little hands with the wire. You can't see that in the detail here. But, so in '69, I left Sam. I was going through a divorce, and a friend of mine taught ceramics at Cal State Fullerton, and so he offered me a position as an equipment technician in the art department. And what I wanted to do at that time was educate myself and socialize myself. I'd spent 7 years living in a grove, going nowhere, just working on art. So I was very reclusive, and I wanted to get out in the public, and I wanted to continue my art education in other media. So going to work at Fullerton was a godsend from my friend. So I went from seeing nobody to working with 35 people in 4 hours each day. And it was great time. I spent a lot of time helping people build projects because I had a natural sense of engineering, so I could look at their problems and help them get through that. So it was educational for me as well. And I started my own business with a friend of mine, and we were doing mostly store interiors along the coast, jewelry stores and that kind of thing. This is some of the work that I started producing over the next 5 to 10 years. The rocking chair here, this chair here, was the first chair that I made after leaving Sam. That was 4 years later before I made a piece of furniture like that. His influence on me was so strong that every time I sat down to design something, I just had to put it away, because it took me a long time to work into my own language of an aesthetic. The music stand is Koa. We'll see another one from that same series. The chest of drawers was made from bird's eye maple, and the table on the upper left is my first attempt at starting to work with mixed media format. I moved to Santa Cruz with my wife then in '76. And this is one of the first pieces I made out of my studio up there, a Koa music stand. This is typical of the kind of display that I was building. I wanted to do something that was artful and yet didn't interfere with what it was there for. And so I would try all kinds of different things. This was one of my favorite small jewelry cases. Had a 45-degree angle in the back with a piano hand, so when you unlocked it, it would tip backwards. And I designed it to have no beading. I want the glass to be pure and clean all the way around. And I had to concede to the round beading ring on the inside, but they worked out really well. The client kept ordering more and more. He loved them that much. I also was getting into doing mixed media jewelry, and I was collecting bamboo. I was obsessed with it, and I started working with it as a medium. This is a cross-section slice of bamboo, the little earring on the right. married to holly and ebony that created the stripes. The earrings straight across were actually, it's hard to see, I don't think you can see the detail, but they're little lily pads out of ebony with a pearl to mimic a drop of dew on the leaf. And then the others are just mixed media. I would use anything to create a design for these bolo ties. These are some more sophisticated pieces. Sterling silver on the left with a cast sterling element on it. These are brooches that are 1.5 to 2 inches in size. The one on the right is mixed media with sterling and fine silver and holly and ebony. And then the yellow piece is actually glass cane. I have many glassblower friends up in Santa Cruz, and so I would collect various little elements that I could use along with the design of these pieces. More music stand experience. The one on the left is a Brazilian rosewood. During the 80s, I started doing a series of for me, challenging vessels. These are sculptural forms, they're not functional. The way I started making them was, I actually was making containers with cap lids on them that just set in. I didn't like hardware, so the lids would just fit in the top. And I walked into the gallery in Carmel one day, just in time to see this older gentleman pick one of them up and turn it upside down. And he was saying, "What is this a radio?" And the lids fell on the floor, and it was carpeted, so it didn't damage anything, but I just looked at that and went, I'm gluing the lids on. And so that led to this series of ebony vessels that I created over the next 5 or 6 years. I wanted to mention the piece on the left was an experiment, challenge to myself, because the Paduc and the ebony are actually glue joints where they join. Those are shapes that are cut to fit one another and glued together. It's not an inlay. And so what I wanted to see was if I could do a shape like that, and with the two separate types of wood, would they last and work together? As a matter of fact, I still have that piece, and it's never moved. Where it separated was along the seam next to it. I developed some cracks when I moved to the desert. It dried out. And so, but that was an experiment. The one on the right is an example of using wood graphically, because I started using a wood from New Guinea called Paldeo, and it had these beautiful graphic mineral washes in them. And the wood on top is a wood called bloodwood, and then there's ebony. And another example of these pieces, the one on the left is actually poplar wood with a mineral stain and these beautiful little floating Buddhas in it. And so I like that image so much, I just split the wood in two, so the image is on both sides of the piece. There's no front or back to it. And then, again, challenging, the little knobs you see on the top piece, the little bumps, we're using a Japanese technique where you set it with a nail set, or a rounded nail set. You drive the wood in, and then you steam it, and it puffs it up, and then you can sand around those. So each one of those got sanded around each little dot. The ones on the end were actually little plugs I made and installed in the piece. And these were all challenges to just push the aesthetic and see how involved I could get. The one on the right is another example of Paldeo, and here again I was playing with some intricate joinery. This was one of the last ones in the series right before I moved back to Southern California. And I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but the one on the right is an image of the top, and you'll notice a little grate in there. So each one of these had an opening or a grate where you sense the inside of the vessel. So it didn't look just like a block of wood. This is Gaboon ebony, and it's the pure black ebony that they make instruments out of, that kind of thing. It's one of my favorite wood. This was my lighting period. I went to see the show in LACMA, I think it was in the 60s, of Alberto Giacometti. his bronze sculptures. And I walked into this one room and I saw Diego, his brother, a beautiful large portrait of Diego. And as I walked in the room and went around the piece, it just changed into a straight line. It was flat. And it just blew my mind, that idea that it has such a full dynamic portrait. And then as you walk around it, it just flattened out. And then it opened up again as you went around the other side. So I was playing with some ideas for lighting in the 80s, and I decided, I remember Diego. So I call these my Diego lights. They're only 2 inches thick, but they're really dramatic on the side, and the tops are aluminum with a touch switch that had a 2, 4, and 6 watt bulb in it. So they're night lights. And then the cord element I used as an aesthetic part of the piece, letting it show. The little skins on top that look like shrimp were actually shoji paper that I bought that had a plastic cover on both sides. I found that I could split it open and tear it apart and make these thin pieces with rice paper on the inside. And the plastic I could score and it would bend, and it would be like a little spring-loaded piece. And so I decided to use those for the top part of the luminaire. So I had a lot of fun making those. In 1992, I went to visit Sam. I often visited him, but it'd been a while since I'd seen him, and when I went to visit him, it was in January of '92. He informed me that they were going to move his house to the new compound, to a new place. And I immediately went, this is going to kill him, because I knew how attached he was to the house. And so at the end of the month, I went back to see him and I said, how about if I come back to work for you? And because I knew that he was going to need help during this period. And he agreed immediately. And so I went from creating objects to sanding Sam's furniture again after 30 years. But it wasn't just sanding. I was learning a new aesthetic. The pieces that I worked on originally were gone. The new ones were super sculptural with lots of detail, and it took me at least a year to feel comfortable in shaping those without any instruction from Mike Johnson, who I worked with in that area. So it was a strange transition period for me. So I don't want to talk about the boredom of recreating the same object over and over. Sam loved woodworking and he loved the process, and that never bothered him. But as you can see from my history, I'm not real good with repetition. And so what I started doing was collecting objects from the shop that I used to make furniture with. And so the art piece, Mixed Media piece on the right, on the left, is actually one of my glue boards, where after I would glue something up with a roller, I would roll it out on the board. So that represents about 5 years of glue laminated up on top of each other, and that's the natural color of the board. And I started looking at these elements and thinking they'd make great mixed media art pieces, and that I could start exploring that. If you look at the one on the right, that was a circle piece that was cut down smaller. The horizontal piece is what we call a template for laying out pieces, and you'll see a little glue cup hanging on there with a brush in it, which was inside the paper cup. It came out intact, like this little kind of insect. And so that's the kind of stuff I started doing to get myself back into doing art. At the same time, we rented an industrial space, and I set up a clay studio again, and I started doing pottery again after many years. The piece on the left has a carved wood lid, and it's a bamboo ash glaze. I took a lot of my leftover bamboo cuttings and burnt them to make an ash glaze that I could use on the pottery. The piece on the right is a raku sculpture. It's about, I'd say, 16 inches tall with a lithium glaze on it, and that happens to be in the AMOCA, American Museum of Ceramic Art collection. While I was working with Sam, the the whole idea of Sam's move was coming into fruition, and I sort of became a liaison with Sam, working with the contractors and with the architects. And Sam finally decided he had to build a model of his new house on the property. I should mention that they were going to move his compound to a new spot, and his home was going to become a cultural center. That meant Sam was homeless. So they had to agree to build him a new home on the site that would eventually revert to the foundation. Sam had great difficulty explaining what he wanted for his home with the architects and everybody concerned. And so he decided to build a model. And so I worked with him for 4 months, and I built this model with him, working every day, and the lids pop off. I decided to build it in a large scale like this so that he could actually look into the space and see relationships. Because I learned early that in an abstract sense, he didn't have a good sense of space in the abstract. But if he could see it, he got it. And anyway, it took us 4 months to build the model. And when we were done, we took the model, gave it to the architects, and they generated all the plans and material from the model rather than the other way around. And if you look at the far right-hand end of the garage there, you'll see a red beam sculpture. When I landscaped this for him, I put artwork around because he always had artwork on the property. And I decided that little sculpture, after looking at it, that I would like to make it full scale. And so years later, 15 years later or so, using recycled timbers from Sam Maloof, they had to dismantle buildings, and we salvaged all the timbers from the buildings, and I wanted to use those as art, recycle them into art pieces. Here I'm working on a cradle in Sam's shop. Over the years, I made 9 of these for Sam. I kind of specialized them. He had me do them. And these were one of the most complicated sculptural pieces that we worked on in Sam's catalog. This is a piece I made that's a replica of a fanback chair from 1956. After Sam passed away, we decided to go back and add certain designs from the 50s that we liked and bring them into our catalog for sale. So Mike and I made 5 or 6 designs. I made this one. I made 2 of them actually. They're absolutely authentic to the original structure. The only time we would change something is if the structural element was not really good. Because Sam was teaching himself how to make furniture during this time. He was learning engineering, how to make beautiful furniture that was comfortable. And so this was a learning period for him. So anyway, we made a bunch of these and we sold them all. And I decided to design a rocking chair with the Maloof Corporation based on that fanback chair. And so I wanted to have that feel, but I wanted to update it with a wooden seat, the new joinery, and ergonomic spindles rather than turn spindles. If you have chairs with a lot of turn spindles, you know they're not very comfortable. So I wanted to make these really comfortable and add that element to it. We also had a client that came to visit Sam with her parents in the 60s. I worked on their furniture originally, and she was a little girl, came with them for lunch. And years later, she decided she wanted a replica of the cork dining table that Sam had in his kitchen. So we made that, and then she decided she wanted chairs based on the 60s aesthetic, but she didn't want upholstered chairs. So I redesigned an earlier Sam dining chair, the same thing with a wooden seat, new joinery, and ergonomic spindles. And so I made 4 of these for her. During this time, all the artwork I was doing doing a lot more drawing and starting to get into painting more. And these 2 pieces are in the Maloof collection. Sam bought them from one of our shows. I was getting more into clay, and I wanted to start building characters. This was the first one. I wanted to see if I could do a head that would look back at me and ask me a question or give me a look. And so that was the criteria for doing the clay characters. They had to have life. They had to look at me. And so I did a whole series of these in the early 2000s, after the millennium. And oddly, these are the most successful clay work I've done in terms of sales and collectors and that kind of thing. I was also doing furniture. This is a commission for a long-term client of mine that I had done, I think, 5 stores for him over the years, designed and built the interiors. And anyway, he wanted some bar stools for his new house, and so I built these. This was more sculptural type of clay I was doing at the same time. These are salt glazed pieces. I was working out of Chaffey College at this time in the late 90s, and just pushing ideas around, wanting more expressive forms. And I got more into assemblage, mixed media assembly. What I would do is make a whole bunch of raku parts, just make parts, and then I would go back and start putting parts together to create pieces. The one in the center is also in the Mocha collection, and these are the ones on the right side of the screen are all raku, pretty much. I think there's a terracotta disc in the one in the center. This is a design of opportunity. When we were building the new structure up at the new site, the rebar would come in these long strands wrapped in this pencil rod and heated and twisted and tied to hold the rebar together. Well, when they would take it undone, they'd just clip it and throw it on the ground. And I started seeing these things laying around, and I started picking them up thinking that they could be a great element in an art piece. And so one day it finally hit me, and it was based on some political controversy that I had experienced and I had an emotional reaction to. I thought of all these big fat heads laying on their backs, and this is the conversation coming out of their mouth, these rods. So it was just a fun thing for me to make and play with. I had a good time doing that. Because of my experience of obsessive bamboo collection for years, I decided I wanted to do some bamboo wall panels in sculpture. And these are some examples. I did quite a few of them. These are all raku fired. And the one on the upper left is actually 8 feet long in 3 sections that all fit together hanging on a rail. And I had a lot of fun making those. And I learned a lot in the process of doing it and using stains and stamps and other things. Some more sculptural pieces of me just having fun playing things around. The piece, we'll see that piece on the right again. These are more of the characters. These are like 20 inches, 24 inches tall. They're large pieces. And I got away from doing high fire glazing and started using wax patinas, different colored waxes layered up to create the surface. I call them cold patinas. More examples of that period. The one in the center is in the Maloof collection. Emil is on the right, and I can't remember that other dude's name. And this is Naima. I wanted to do some bronze pieces, but I couldn't afford it. And so I started experimenting with red and green waxes to create a look of bronze. This is in Sam's collection, that piece. And another example of a large detail. You can see the way that piece is looking with intensity. Remember string theory at the beginning? This is Mr. String Theory. And image came to me, and it was based on the fact that in the 60s I had done some animation stuff with doll hands, little rubber doll hands. So they would walk along and do stuff. And So I was thinking that particular day, I wonder if I could make large doll hands like I used back in the day. And so I started making them, and they turned out really cool. And then the idea for this piece came. And so I stuck them on there. They're totally illogical. But I just made this piece, and it was all about my fascination with string theory. And so that's the ball of string up there. This is my political statement. Sam commissioned me to make a bird pie. And so that's what this piece is on the left. This is my bird pie. And the piece on the right is just about relationships. And I was invited to participate in a series of shows called 11 by 11. So you had to make a piece that was exactly 11 inches on all sides, but it could be anything. And so I started doing these little shadow boxes with clay and wood and lacquer and that kind of thing, and fun things to do. This was a title page for a show I had in Pomona at Bunny Gunner Gallery that was all Sumi ink paintings. And this was a title page called Cannibal Dow. And I had just started working again with Sumi ink, acrylics, stains, and tagging paint. And so these were some of my favorites from that series of work. For that same show, because I like volume, I challenged myself with, could I make a paper sculpture? I was wondering if I could make a large paper sculpture that would stand, and it had to be constructed, the strength would come from the way it was folded. So I started doing some experiments with it, and I got totally obsessed with making these pieces with the paintings on them. Then I realized that they couldn't stand, that it wouldn't work, and so I built the bamboo structure that supported them. And it wasn't until I was completely done, I was so focused on making and doing the structural parts and all of that, that it wasn't until I got it finished and came back out to the shop, to the studio, and looked at them, and I went, I made kimonos. and so it was a shock when I saw them. And so the next thing that I realized was I needed covered pedestals with vitrines to display these. I couldn't go just put them out in the gallery. So it became a very expensive experiment. But I really liked the experience of making those. I enjoyed the process of making them. And I spent a lot of money at the paper store in Bergamot Station in the process. When I moved to the desert, everybody out there is doing desert motifs, cocopelli, rabbits, coyotes, cactus. And so when I moved out there, I said I would never do a desert motif, ever. And so I was doing these things called bird bags, which is a little black clay bag with a raven's head coming out of it. It's one of the most popular things I've done. And so one of my friends asked me to make a rabbit bag. And so I started doing studies in rabbit heads. And so I had a bunch of rabbit heads sitting around. And so this one day, I just looked at the one, and this image came to me of it coming out of the box. And so I made this piece. And so, because rabbits are animal chow in the desert, that's what they're made for, everything eats them, I used the bloodwood as the top of the hole that it's coming out of. And then the Clairol walnut is very figurative. It's California walnut from Northern California. It's got lots of figure in it and lines. And so I used that particular wood as in relation to a topomat, to indicate a topomat. And so none of this makes any sense, but it's just the process of making pieces and following the scent of the piece, if I can say it that way. And so these are all mixed media. There's even some guitar toner lacquer on the top. The one on the left came from the same period. I made those one after the other, and I collected night blooming cereus for years. I had a bunch of cactus. They all were frosted out in the desert. I lost them all. So I thought I would do an homage to my favorite cactus. And so that's how this piece got made. I had a piece of 8/4 poplar that was green. That's the color of the wood. I didn't have to stain it or anything. And so it was a lot of fun to make these two pieces. A lot of challenging aspects to them as well. This chair is the one that we see here. It has a funny story. It's the remake of a chair that I made in 1976 that was upholstered. And I wanted to do it over, improve it, use the new joinery, a hardwood seat. And so I made it as a prototype for a class I was going to teach at Anderson Ranch Art Center in Snowmass Village, Colorado. And I was teaching a chair class, and I wanted to take something up as an example. I got it 2/3 done. I got it all assembled and 2/3 shaped, and I decided I didn't like it for some reason. And I put it up on the shelf in my shop, and when Lauren Verdugo came to work with me as an apprentice, I'm going to talk about that later because part of my program is about mentoring. She was learning to sand, and she was doing a fine job. She picked it up very quickly. She saw the chair on the shelf and asked me, "What's that doing up there?" And I said, "I don't like it." And she goes, "What's not to like?" And so let's get it down. And so she made me bring it down, and she started looking at it and said, "This is beautiful. Why? Well, you're crazy." And she goes, "If you'll finish shaping it, I'll sand it on my own time." And so I said, "Okay, you got a deal." So I went ahead and finished shaping it. She sanded it out, one of her first real serious sanding jobs. And so I gave it to her because basically it was headed for the scrap pile. And so, but now that I look at it, I don't know what was wrong with me. It's got gorgeous wood in it. It's a beautiful piece. Around that same time, when she came to work for me, we had been invited to participate in an LA Arboretum event where they took trees that had been killed from insect or drought or windblown damage. They had piles of beautiful trees that were dead. So they invited 160 some artists to come out, get wood, take it home, make objects, bring it back for an auction to rebuild their tree fund at the Arboretum. So that's how these two tables got made, because I went out and got some sequoia wood, which is on the ends of the piece on the left, and some beautiful tan oak that I used on the table on the right. The table on the right was a real pivotal piece for me because I really was transitioning into combining steel with wood and glass to create furniture. The toes on that, I cut the bark off and sanded those out. And the way I kept the bark on was to dilute glue and saturate it over and over and over again so it would adhere all the bark to the base. And one of my really good clients bought that right away. It's in her collection. This is part of a series I called Horizon Series, and it's about my environment where I live out in the desert. And so I have these ravens quasi-trapped kind of in a way, and then underneath each one there's a graphite pencil drawing of the mesa where I live that I look at down valley. And it's about the assault on my environment and the way animals are being squeezed. And I'm not a conceptual artist. I don't plan to be. I don't work that way. But these are intuitive pieces that come from the emotion that I was feeling at that time. So I got up to 20 some of these. Oh, I was going to mention, the one in the center is a faux rust finish that I use on Baltic birch. And you're going to see much more of that. This was a theme box. It's a commission from a close friend of mine for their daughter's wedding, to put the cards and notes from the wedding in to keep them. And so they lived in Kenai, Alaska. They had a cabin in 45 minutes out of Homer, Alaska, only accessible by boat. And the cliffs there are basalt with a 20-foot tidal surge. So at certain times of the month, the sea will drop 20 feet. And you can kayak along the basalt and pick mussels off and take them back and eat them. And so I decided I would do, because she loved that cabin, loved being out there, I would do this little mussel pond. And so I used zirconi, a wood that looks very much like the lines in the basalt, and I made the mussels out of ebony, and then I unwound black nylon rope to make the fibers, the filaments that are at the base of the mussels where they attach to the rock. So I had great fun making this, and it was a big hit with her. This is a prototype for one of the first workshops I gave at Maloof, and it was for the veterans program in San Bernardino County, where I would take 5 veterans with PTSD, and we'd start on Friday morning and end on Sunday afternoon, and they would make a piece like this. This was the first prototype I made, and I modified it since then. It's simpler. But these are designed for beginning students and beginning people. And I liked the idea of it so much I started playing personally with other designs for benches, and this was one of the nicest ones from that series. I liked keeping the center open so you view into the piece. You get a sense of the sculptural qualities of what's going on with it, rather than having just a flat top. That's the idea behind the openness. More mischief with mixed media. I call my studio the lab because I'm experimenting all the time. I don't know what I'm doing. I think everything's going to fall apart in 2 years. And this is an iPhone photo that I took at San Diego Zoo of my wife Dee. It's her shadow crossing a bronze grate in the concrete. We were on a pathway going to see the hippos, and we stopped at a bridge where a little stream was running, and I happened to look down and see the shadow, and so I just snapped a shot right quick. So months later, I had to do a series of work for a show coming up, and I remembered that photo, so I put it in Photoshop, tweaked it, put it on a t-shirt transfer. I'm very low tech. I put it on a t-shirt transfer, and I have a t-shirt press, so I printed it onto this thin piece of aluminum. And the rest of the piece is aluminum. And it's one of those pieces, I don't plan these. I just start and things just come and I just go with it. And that's how these pieces evolve. From that same series, more Photoshop images. My table on my press is only 4 by 6 inches, so I had to figure out a way to print the images on in sequence, one at a time, hoping nothing will fall off. But this is a piece called Sirius, and that's an image of Dee's mother when she was 20 years old. And it was such a gorgeous image, I wanted to use it in one of my pieces. I wound up using it in several. This is a piece called Dry Line with Dee's mother on the left and my mother on the right. They're both in their early 20s, but they were 20 years apart. And they both had difficult, let's just say difficult young marriages. And I wanted to kind of honor that. And the Dry Line was actually my daughter's clothesline in Berkeley. I walked out the back door right as the sun was dropping and saw these clothes that looked like bats hanging on the wall. And so I, there again, shot it and tweaked it in Photoshop and put this piece together. The aluminum piece that looks like a saw blade is not a saw blade. It's a metaphor for the abrasion of time. And then there's blood wood on the two ends. But I really enjoy making this kind of work. This piece grew out of that kind of concept. And this is one of those spontaneous pieces where it's just one foot follows the other. I'm trying to get the arrow out of there. So I have a painting in the background with glass in front, and then I have the faux rust on it, and I have tagging paint on these panels that overlay, and they're tweaked so they go through the frame and they tuck back in at angles. So it's a real crazy kind of piece, but when I got it done, I knew that this was, as far as I'm concerned, one of the nicest pieces I've done. And it wasn't until a year later, I was looking at it at my retrospective at the Maloof gallery. I was standing looking at it, and I was going, what was going on here? You know, how did that piece evolve? And so I started thinking about it, and I went, the way my mind works, I have many, many, many images at once going on in my head, and I'm continually working on one or the other, or thinking about it, and it's like this layer of information rattling around my head all the time. And so I looked at this piece and I went, well, that's kind of a metaphor for how my mind works. It's got all those layers going all directions. And anyway, that's just me considering it. This is another one in that series. The front panel was actually a template I made to emboss paper with. I wanted to put wet paper on and run it through my clay slab roller to emboss the image on the paper. I'd done a series of that work back in the 70s, and I decided I wanted to revisit that. But it didn't work. I could not get a crisp line because I didn't have enough pressure with my clay roller. You need a real press to do that, an etching press. And so I just put them aside. I did a series of maybe 3 of these different templates. And I came across it maybe a year later in a pile of stuff, and I looked at it and I went, well, for crying out loud, that's an art piece in itself. You know, that's a beautiful image. And so I started using those templates as the art element. And so that's how things evolve. It's just how things, one to another, you know. I included this because these are more large sculptures. I kind of revisited my 60s metalwork, and these are all wood elements salvaged from the Maloof move. At one point in time, they were going to get rid of all this timber, and I just said no, rented a big truck, loaded it up, and took it out to my place. And so I've been slowly using it as art elements in these big sculptures. It was the original concept. And each one of these has material from Maloof Mood. This is where I live out in the desert. This is what it looks like. This was a commission by a friend of mine. He wanted a layback chair so when he came back from work, he could have a beer and sit there and relax. And so I designed this piece for him out of Winchi. And Winchi is a dark black brown wood, African, and walnut and black leather. This was a series called Random X Furniture. I was invited to go to Anderson Ranch for 2 weeks as a visiting artist. And so a couple of days before I left, I just designed a whole bunch of tables, 5 tables, made the templates, selected wood, and took it, went up there, and in the 2 weeks, I made 5 tables. I didn't finish them. I brought them home and did the finishing at home, but I got them all constructed while I was there. I like that kind of challenge. This is one of the tables from that series. This is 2 layers of Baltic birch plywood with a faux finish on it, that faux rust finish. And when you stand and look at it, it looks like rusted steel. It's really amazing what you can do with material like that. And here I've used it on ceramic sculpture because, as I think I mentioned before, I was getting away from high fire and I was exploring cold patinas. So I took one of my clay bisqueware. This is about 18 inches tall or so, 20, and started playing around with patinas on. This is another example. If you look at this, I don't know whether you can see it, but there's a blue spot on the top on the left side of that piece. Can you see that? Does it show up? It's this teal blue color. When I first started using this finish, it was in the monsoon season out there, so we were getting thunderstorms through all the time. And so I was seeing how this worked. There's a thick primer you can put on anything and it will stick. And then it has a iron-laden pigment that goes on top of that with an activator, which sets off the action. Well, I was having trouble with it and it was not working. I was very upset. And I had it outside on the tables and all of a sudden one of these showers came through. And so big giant drops were coming down, and so I ran out and grabbed the samples and pulled them in, continued what I was doing. Then I walked over and looked. Everywhere a raindrop had hit was bright rust red orange, acid rain. So I went and got a bunch of containers and tubs and put them out and collected rainwater. So when I used this stuff, I used the rainwater along with the accelerator or activator to create, and it works beautifully. But the rainwater produces the blue tone. When you get it in concentrated forms, it turns it blue, that teal blue. So it was another accidental discovery. You know, that's what I like. This is a larger piece, 4x4, called Desert Mandala. It was for a show I was invited in Palm Springs. And so I'm using super adobe and found objects from the desert and the rust finish, acrylics, lacquers. There's all kinds of stuff on here. But I enjoy these kinds of pieces. This is a little larger piece called Nickel Slot. And this is a piece that came from my anger and emotion from the way the environment was being treated out where I live, with ATVs running all over people's property and the general decay of respect for that land. And so I worked on it for 2 weeks, I got it done, and I was just absolutely disappointed with it because it just didn't have the punch I wanted it to have. It just was sitting there. And so one night I woke up at 4 in the morning and I saw the ducks. And so early that morning I went out and cut out a template for the ducks and cut that piece out, assembled it. I found that a piece of molding that looked like a screw thread that I put underneath it like it's going across. And that's what I needed for that piece to really make it punch. And that's why I called it Nickel Slot. It's like a carnival chute, you know. This is the last piece I made in my clay studio in Pomona before I moved out. That was about 4 years ago, and I haven't had a studio set up since then, but I'm ready in the process now of getting back into ceramics, into sculpture. But this lovely person came to visit me at the end of my stay in Pomona, and it's in my collection. I wanted to talk a little bit about the classes I'm doing at Maloof. On the right is an example of what I call the butterfly table. It's part of that Random X furniture series with a round circular top. These are designed for absolute beginners. People take these classes that have never touched a woodworking tool, and they get done in 3 days. The young men on the left, lower left, were from San Jacinto High School, and they came out and made their benches in 3 days, the same thing, took one of the workshops. It was great fun. Just really wonderful young men. It gave me great hope for the future, working with them. The bench above that, I call the Shibui bench or long bench, is a new workshop I'm adding in December and next January, 25. But there will be prerequisites for taking that class. You will have had to take the small bench class or have a portfolio showing you know how to do woodworking. And so that's what I'm doing now at Maloof as a resident artist there. Consulting, dealing with history of the place because I've been there so long, and teaching workshops like these every month, well, 10 times a year. So I want to talk about mentoring. When Sam was a young man out of the Army, Millard Sheets, a really famous Southern California painter and head of the graduate program at Scripps College, hired Sam as his assistant. And Sam worked with him for a number of years in the late 40s. And Sam, Millard was his mentor. He took him in, moved him into his home. He became his son. And he passed on his knowledge to Sam and helped nurture who he became. He and Frida got married. They had no furniture and no money. So he decided to go and do woodworking just to build things for their home. And that's how he got started, coming from that great energy from Millard Sheets. So when I was 19 years old, I went to work for Sam, and he became my mentor. Same scenario. He took me away from my family. he kidnapped me. I became his adopted son. And what I learned with him was not just woodworking. He's actually not a very good teacher. I learned by looking over his shoulder, and periodically he would come and say, "Larry, come in here." So I would go in, and then he would show me something he'd already shown me 3 or 4 times. But it was his moment to be a teacher. And so I paid attention to what he was doing, how he worked, how he processed material. And another most important thing in that mentoring process was he introduced me to people I couldn't imagine existed, other artists and craftsmen, friends of his, and not only that, but a way of life, which was the most important thing that he introduced me to, and which helped me form my life from that point on, to influence me. I'm peculiar in that I never really hardcore wanted a career. I tried that in the 60s, 70s, applied for NAA grants and all that kind of stuff, and got up there a couple of times, but it was not a pressing need for me. My relationship with making art is about the process of making it. That's why I do it. I enjoy the mental energy that goes into the manipulation of materials, solving problems, and that. When I get done with a piece, I go, "Oh, yeah, that's a nice piece," but I'm ready for something else. Getting back into the juice of just going through that process. And so in 2017, Lauren Verdugo, who I'd known through Maloof for a long time, had finished her AA at Chafee and wanted to become my apprentice. And I said, "Well, I don't have any money and I live in the desert, so that's going to be a problem." So we negotiated, and she came to work for me, and it was a changing point for both of us, because I had never had an apprentice, never worked with anybody significant before. And when she came, she really took the load off me the way I took it off Sam. And she was learning so fast, I couldn't believe it. She's academically bright, a fantastic person. She's basically become like a daughter to me now. So she worked with me for a number of years, then became my assistant at Maloof for the workshops. And she's been involved with many programs at Maloof, designing and helping there. And she just left for Pennsylvania August 2nd. She left for Pennsylvania to head up a wood program at a school there 7 years after she started woodworking. She finished her BA in applied design. She bailed on the grad school, but she'll go back. But she's back there now, about the same age. She's a little older than I was. When I went to work at Cal State Fullerton, I was 26. And she's about the same age going to work for this school in her development. So these are some pieces that she worked with me on. The left is a memorial that I designed from a good friend, Roz Bach, who passed away. The foundation asked me if I would design something for her, and so her history with the construction industry prompted me to use concrete corten steel for the backing plates. And then I made the clay rose plate, fired it, took it to a foundry and had them cast it. And so all of these elements were part of her history. And I wanted the chime in there so that when you walk by and you hear the chime, you would think of Roth. So it worked out really well. I was really happy with that. The center pictures are Lauren learning how to make my bird bags in the clay studio. She learned welding. She learned everything that I knew how to do. She picked it up really fast. And the piece next to it is another one of the beam sculptures that I did that we had just installed out at my place in the desert. So there we are. That's my ball of knotted string.